Hey reader, this is Centaur here. I'm joined by baby Centaur, who is awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, has been awake longer than this, as have I, and he doesn't want to go to sleep. So I figured that if I have to be awake, and if maybe by holding him and boring him, he may fall asleep, then maybe the best thing we could do would be to record video. So this one is not scripted. There is no script going on behind this. This is stream of consciousness at 3 a.m. in the morning with Centaur. Okay. And it's going to be a little tricky because the plan is to find a way to get him to fall asleep listening to me while getting you guys to be very interested in what I'm saying so that you watch the video. So I'm not going to lie, this is going to be tricky. But worst case scenario, you guys get an extra video for the week. Best case scenario, I get to fall asleep. Both of these things I think are good. So the topic that we're going to have for this, I'm going to call it, I don't know, something like Midnight Musings or something like that, although obviously this is happening at 3 a.m. But the topic that I'm going to talk about is the difference between tactics and strategy, and the reason why this matters. Okay. Now, I see this very often online, and it makes sense. Somebody will post and they'll say, like, what's the strategy for using bazookas, right? Or anti-tank rifles. Very often, anti-tank infantry teams. This is very commonly the thing. Okay. And I think it's a good question, right? An important question, and I think it makes sense as to why it would appear for an AT team, for example, over and against, say, a mortar, right? Because the strategy of mortars is relatively simple because the utility of mortars is relatively simple, right? Indirect fire only weapon, and thus it works best against people that camp, right? So not many people need to ask a strategy question regarding mortars. We know what it is. It's a counter battery weapon and a battery weapon, right? That's what it does. But for AT teams, it's a little more tricky, right? Because there's a lot of things to consider. There's the range to consider. There's the damage potential to consider. There's the, is it okay to just generate pins? Do you need to do more than that? And I think because of that, it's a very interesting question. But then you start seeing people wanting to give advice to these questions, and they have to ask a bunch of questions beforehand. So they'll ask things like, what kind of map are you playing on? What kind of scenario are you playing? What kind of armor are you up against? And then, after having asked those questions, they're really able to better answer it. And I think this is because in both cases, the person asking the question, the person answering the question, there's a slight confusion between the difference between strategy and tactics. So we're going to talk about that very briefly today. Okay? Strategy is high-level, overarching conditions and plans for victory. Okay, so in grand scale things, for example, in real life stuff. Okay, there's currently a large war happening in Eastern Europe, for example, at the time of this recording. There's a strategic question of when does one side pivot from offense to defense, right? Where are we going to strategically allocate assault units in order to try to break through enemy lines, break through stalemates, achieve breakthroughs, and reclaim ground or take ground, right? So there's a lot of questions about that. That's strategy, okay? In wargaming, this would include things like what list are you bringing, because that's going to determine what tools you have, what things you have available, okay? It's going to include what the scenario is. That way we know what the victory conditions and the win conditions are for attaining victory points, right? It's also going to include things like any sort of comp or other specialized rules that are added into and above the rules of the game, right? Or any rules in the game that are not being used. Okay, all of that is critical, right? So, for example, back in second edition, there was with the Juggernaut pack, there was a rule that machine gun teams did a pin to a unit as long as they shot at a unit, that was within your range, right? And so because of that, knowing that changes why you would or wouldn't take a specific unit and what its effectiveness would be. Okay. So we consider all of those things. Okay. That means that from a strategy question, when you're looking at, for example, anti-tank infantry teams, we're going to start by asking some questions. Is the purpose of this AT team to primarily do pins? If so, AT rifles are fantastic. Is the goal actually to do removal? Well, then one might consider taking something like a Panzerschreck or a dog mine team or a bazooka, right? Or something else like that, that one also has access to, but definitely costs more points, but it's going to do that job better, right? Is the goal primarily to sit back and let the enemy come to you? Well, then in that case, something like an AT rifle is going to do fantastic. Is the goal maybe to avoid something like, say, multiple rocket launchers? Is the goal of it to push up aggressively and get right up there into the enemy's face and really push deep into enemy territory? Well, then a Piat works just fine, right? Because it's not particularly expensive. It has a short range, but the plan was to be at that range anyway, right? So because of that, there's a strategic aspect, right, to the game, which fundamentally comes down to what's your plan, right? The plan requires us to know what the scenario is. The plan requires us to have a vision for how we are going to attain victory based on the options that we've chosen, okay? And then there's tactics. Tactics takes things from the macro level and brings it down to the micro level. This is things like the consideration of cover, consideration of deployment, okay? Other stuff like that, which is going to change things, right? There's a tactical aspect between taking a Piat and taking a Piat in a Jeep, right? There's a tactical difference between placing an AT rifle to cover a lane and provide pins and placing an AT rifle in a ruin to create pins, right? These things are going to give you benefits that attain the overall strategy but are different, okay? And what happens is that people often get these things mixed up. So for example, they want to give advice like, well, you gotta put your Piat in a Jeep because that way you can rush it up pretty quickly. You can put it on a road. You can move it 24 inches and still pop that Jeep out in the exact same turn. They're even going to tell you things like take a platoon commander without any extra men, put him also in the Jeep, so that way you can activate him, snap to both the Jeep and the Piat. You can get them both out and you get the morale benefit on those guys to cover over any pins and make sure that if you have to take an order test, you get it off, right? These are, I think, very, very important points. And it's very good advice. But in order for them to give you this advice, they're thinking, well, I need to know, do you have access to a Jeep? I need to know, are you planning on rushing up very aggressively or are you planning on sitting back, right? And so in order to give that tactical advice, they have to know the strategy, right? They need more information. And so I'm not going to make this video particularly long. I think you get the point, right? There's a difference between strategy and tactics. And maybe I'll do a deeper dive video with an actual PowerPoint in the future. We'll see. But if you're finding that you're having difficulty getting advice from people online for your list, or you're finding that their advice kind of seems or feels a little bit off, it could be this difference in either they just don't understand your strategic plan, right? You know, they're coming at it differently. They're coming at it from an aggressive style of play. You're coming at it from more of a gunline style of play. Or it could be that there's a mix-up between strategy and tactics, that they're trying to give you tactical advice, but you're thinking, well, I'm not going to have that situation, right? Like, you know, yes, it's a good idea to move up and get into the enemy, but I've been finding that because I'm the first person moving up, I'm the person getting shot up, right? That's a consideration. That's a point, right? You know, there may be sometimes where, yes, you have a unit that has to get in close, but maybe it has to get in close on turn 4, right? Or turn 3. And you have those first few turns where you're providing fire down range to set the stage for moving in close, okay? So that's really all I want to talk about. Baby Centaur has not fallen asleep yet. So I hope you found this interesting. I will still be awake, and I will be taking care of business and getting him down so that his mother can sleep. But if you like this sort of content, let me know. If you don't, this might be the only midnight musing that we do. But let us know what you think down below, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.